After 1,000 years, Zaraki freaking Kenpachi's Bankai is here! He now can cut through anything, including the fabric of space and time. Without even knowing his sword's name, Kenpachi had been casually bringing everyone to their knees. He is literally the only person to become a captain without Bankai or even Shikai. Much like Ichigo, Kenny built his reputation through sheer raw strength, showcased by his insane level of Retsu, which he limits using his eye patch just so he can have a decent challenge. However, the entrance of the Soul King's son, Unohana, the most powerful foe Gotei 13 has ever faced, forced Kenpachi to undergo his greatest training arc. But to understand his new insane power, we first need to unravel who exactly is Zaraki Kenpachi, taking us back 1,000 years from the current story to the unfortunate place in Soul Society called Zaraki, the very name of District 80. If you know anything about Rukongai, these districts are ranked by how dangerous and prosperous they are. So District 1 is super rich and nice, but 80, yeah, anyone born there is cooked. The place is a war zone where residents prey on each other. Kenpachi grew up here alone, without a family or even a name, where eventually he later chooses to take his surname from this very place. However, during that time, the only way to survive was to fight, and Kenpachi did just that. At this point, Kenny was strong enough to hit his daily aura farming quota by stacking bodies. These challenges were no joke either, and this went on for years, potentially decades. But one day, everything changed. A woman approached him, the most notorious criminal the Soul Society had ever seen. None other than this demon, Yachiru Unohana, the first Kenpachi. Yep, that's right. This isn't just a name. It's a title bestowed only to those who loves to fight and has slain more than any other Shinigami. No matter how many times they are caught, they will never fall. This title holds so much weight that it even became a solid rule that there can only be one Kenpachi per generation, and Unohana set the standards. Being part of the strongest and most brutal generation of Gotei 13, Unohana was a true monster, but even someone of her station and power was scared. A nameless boy who had never received formal training had wounded her, resulting in Unohana's first smile in centuries, because she knew how gifted this boy was. With the right training, he could surpass her. But for all his worth, Kenpachi had a detrimental flaw, as after this fight, Kenny subconsciously started to limit himself. Just imagine being in his shoe. He had the best fight of his life against Unohana, and he didn't want it to end. If he continued to tap into his inner power, she would have been dead. And with that, so would the opportunity for another battle like it. In effect, this experience had literally halted him and consciously added a huge mental block in his mind. If he ever reached his peak, he would never find a worthy opponent and relive the life and death battle he once had. This was a fate worse than death. But it was around this time he came across a young girl. A girl who showed no fear of his sword or him. Which, to be fair, is kind of mad, considering most people will think he's a psychopath. But the reason for this is because she knew who Kenny was better than anyone. She was part of his soul, his Zanpakutō spirit. How she materialized into her own person is what we're going to explain. So stick around, and to stay focused, unleash your Bankai by sipping on some gamer subs. What? You don't have any? Well, get some. Use our code ABD. They're having a special promotion. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War, Death and Strawberry strawberry flavor. And gosh damn it, tastes like Nesquik strawberries. And hey, if you guys are broke, no problem, just get some free samples. Now, at this point, Kenny was going through a bloodbath, destroying everyone in his path as he got to District 79. To him, this girl literally came out of nowhere. And since she was so giddy and unfazed, he decided to adopt her, thinking that if he left her there, she would be, pretty much be dead. Then he decided to name her Yachiru in memory of the only person he had ever admired. Her surname Kusajishi was given to her after the name of the district she was found in. Together, the two became buddies and inseparable. Now, if you guys are thinking, how the heck did Kenpachi not realize that was his Zanpakutō? Like, are we forgetting Ichigo didn't know that Shiro Ichigo or Holo Ichigo was his? Come on, it just can't happen. And let's also not forget that Renji didn't know the name of his either. It's all about self-discovery, guys. But yet, Zaraki went forwards in his onslaught and eventually met Ikkaku in battle. He spared his life though, teaching him his philosophy of survival. Never seek death after losing. Live, grow stronger, and challenge your opponent again. Now, throughout those years, the Soul Society had been going through a development, a growth, where the ways of the old, treacherous Gotei 13 had simmered down, and Unohana had taken a step backward. The title of Kenpachi went through 9 successes, with the 10th being Kenpachi Kinganjo, or previously known as Gosuke. He had killed the previous Kenpachi, earning his title. However, as tradition, he too was also killed, of course by our Zaraki Kenpachi. This was in front of 200 members of the 11th division. You see, another perk of the Kenpachi title is becoming the captain of the 11th division of Gotei 13. This squad is literally the only one that follows the third method, killing the leader to take their role. Whereas otherwise, to become a captain candidate, you need Bankai, or have some personal recommendations, if you know what I mean. But in all seriousness, leading Unohana, this meant every 11th squad captain was likely killed by their successor. It wasn't long after becoming captain, Kenpachi welcomed Ikkaku and then Yumichika as part of his team. He also was commanded by Yamamoto to take Kendo lessons because Zaraki literally had zero formal training. However, Central 46 ordered the lessons to be halted after just one day. They were absolutely terrified. If Zaraki realized his full potential and ever decided to rebel, he would become an unstoppable and uncontrollable force. That's how broken he is. But on a more emotional level, Kenpachi had a complicated relationship with his Zanpakutō, which was brought to his forefront when he came across our boy Ichigo. The battle started with Ichigo trying his hardest to cut Kenpachi down. Ichigo failed to even dent him at point blank range. His blade was too blunt to penetrate Kenpachi's Ryatsu, and to make matters worse, Kenpachi straight up pointed his Zanpakutō and sliced through Zangetsu as though it was butter. With his Zanpakutō cracked and his body severely injured, Ichigo was done for, if not for Zangetsu activating Ichigo's protagonist powers. Ichigo gets pushed into his inner world, goes up against his inner hollow self, wins, and comes back with a vengeance to defeat Kenpachi. But why does this matter? Because through failure, Ichigo was able to evolve his aptitude and resonance with Zangetsu. He even says he felt sorry for knowing nothing about Zangetsu besides its name. Although technically, it's not really Zangetsu, it's actually Hollow Ichigo, but that's besides the point. Because Ichigo was unknowingly calling out the biggest weakness of the Soul Society's strongest man, who didn't even care to learn his Zanpakutō's name. Kenpachi relied solely on himself and thought indulging in connections was a waste of time. He could already beat anyone. What was the point? But by losing to Ichigo, something changed. Zanpakutōs respond to their names and help their master fight. Yachiru even pointed out that Kenpachi was fighting a 2v1 because Ichigo was relying on Zangetsu. Hence, Kenpachi didn't even have a Shikai release. This made him realize that he wanted to become stronger, planting the seed of an idea that had been sleeping his entire life. That he and his blade could grow stronger together. He tried to listen to his sword but couldn't hear anything. mean, after centuries of neglect, of course, it wouldn't be easy. But Zangetsu mentioned that he could hear Kenpachi's Zanpakutō screaming its name towards its ignorant master. It was pleading to be used, to be unleashed, so they could become the strongest duo in history. And what if I told you that his sword wasn't all that far away? Rather by his side the whole time. His own lieutenant. Yes, let's finally get into it. And let that sink in for a moment. Every time Yachiru was sitting on Kenpachi's shoulder, every time she gave him the wrong directions, every time she cheered for him in battle, that was his Zanpakutō, or at least a part of it. From the very beginning, Kubo was dropping hints that Yachiru was more than just a bubbly vice captain, but they were so subtle that it went over most of our heads. Take this for example. Yachiru is famously terrible at giving Kenpachi directions. She would send him left when they needed to go right, straight when they needed to turn. Basically the Zorro of Bleach. However, this all could be because she's a Zanpakutō who is released. She doesn't know the world the way that Shinigamis should. She was navigating from instinct and familiarity with Kenpachi, not from a true sense of spatial knowledge of the environment. It's a subtle quirk, but it makes complete sense given full context. I even believe that a lot of the Shinigamis suspected the true nature of Yachiru because Ichigo did. The moment they met for the first time, he questioned her on who she is. But what's funny, he followed up by saying, or maybe I should ask, what are you? Knowing that she isn't just a simple Shinigami. Another major hint was that despite being a young child when she was found, Yachiru remembers her meeting with Kenpachi with almost supernatural clarity, mentioning before their meeting she had no name, no parents, and had never even seen any color besides bloody red. Mind you, she's a little girl. This ties back to something Otsu of Squad Zero said, that Kenpachi stole his Zanpakutō from some dead guy. At this point, it was an Asauchi, a nameless, soulless sword. The moment Kenpachi took it, over the years of fighting and pouring his massive spiritual pressure into the blade, he had imprinted his own soul essence. So whilst Yachiru did manifest in District 79, it's more likely that she was born in District 80. Which now brings us to the ultimate question of how is it even possible for a sword spirit to walk around as a living, breathing person? Well, technically they're not really living, but hey, you guys get what I mean, right? And why a child? Well, during the Soul Society arc, Yoriichi explains to Ichigo that the very first step to achieving Bankai is forcing their Zanpakutō spirit to manifest in the physical world. Normally, this requires decades of active, grueling training, but Kenpachi had done this unconsciously because his latent spiritual pressure was so monumentally massive. His soul literally spat out a piece of his Zanpakutō spirit into reality without him even realizing. Now, this isn't as odd as you think. Yachiru's existence might seem like an exception, but we have seen Renji's Zabimaru materialize itself in Soul Society, along with many other instances, like, you know, old man Zangetsu in his younger Tensei form. But why a child is where Kubo's writing shift into absolute poetry. Kubo has stated that Kenny's Zanpakuto's true, fully realized spirit is actually a powerful grown woman, yet Yachiru manifested as a tiny kid, because a Zanpakutō is a direct reflection of his wielder's soul. Her childlike form represents the one thing Kenpachi Zaraki was never allowed to have: his childhood innocence. As a nameless feral orphan in District 80, Kenpachi's early life was a non-stop slaughterhouse where he was never allowed to be soft, weak, or vulnerable. So when he imprinted his soul onto that stolen sword, his inner essence projected his lost childhood. Also, Kenny fundamentally shackled his own power to that exact instant from his youth when he first crossed blades with Unohana. For him, that duel represented absolute peak ecstasy. He had zero interest in maturing or reaching his full potential. He remained the same boy eternally, pursuing the bliss of battle. Simultaneously, Kenny endured extreme loneliness bitterness and resentment whenever he obliterated an opponent without finding true satisfaction. This deep-seated emptiness is precisely why his Zanpakutō manifested as a child, and so he took her in, seeing a literal reflection of his own soul by naming her Yachiru after the only person he ever admired. Zaraki gave his manifested sword a physical identity. Remember, like Ichigo said, words are important, and so being named after a Soul Reaper made her one. Yep, Kenny unknowingly stabilized little Yachiru into a semi-independent functional Shinigami. Because she was forged from his soul, she was able to join the Gotei 13 and even wield a Zanpakutō, Sonpo Kenju. Since she's just a fragment, unlike other Shinigamis, her blade has no release command. It is simply a localized extension of Kenpachi's own reality-bending, raw physical strength, summoning two creatures, Lumpy and Bonnie. The small creature's attack precedes Yachiru's, with the larger one following suit. This means if she misses, one of the other two is guaranteed to hit, making her attacks almost impossible to dodge. You don't just have to deal with Yachiru, you have to account for the 3 simultaneous attacks, all mimicking each other, all hitting at different intervals. The strength of a concentrated strike from Sonpo Kenju is enough to create deep fissures in the ground. According to Isane Kotetsu, a Shikai that summons creatures whilst the blade stays the same is unprecedented. So in an orthodox way, this is Kenpachi learning about his own sword, because he probably seen Yachiru use this power dozens of times. She is just the first stage of Bankai training, meaning that in reality, Kenpachi had already taken his first steps decades ago. He had earned his Zanpakutō's respect and recognition, but his subconscious refusal to become stronger forced him to stagnate. In fact, it was so bad that he couldn't share his Ryotsu with his blade, which is why it was always chipped and worn out. When Kenpachi finally expressed his desire to hear his sword's name, Yachiru replied that they would grow stronger together. She told him that he was the strongest and that he had been her everything since the day they met. But before Kenpachi could truly do anything and understand the truth, the Soul King's very own son, Yuhaba, invaded the Soul Society. Yamamoto dead, Byakuya dead, well, more or less. Kira donutted. Things are looking rough. So rough, it will take a full hour for Kenpachi to even the odds. And so the newly appointed Captain Commander Shunsui orders for Unohana to finally train him and forcefully unlock Kenny's dormant powers. But training isn't really the right word for this, because what we witnessed was a brutal fight to the death. As we all know, Unohana is just as good as healing as she is killing. So Kenpachi dying wasn't an issue. If he kicks the bucket with a snap of a finger, she'd just revive him. Using her Bankai, Minazuki, she pushed him to the brink of death, dragging him back to the world of the living over and over again. This was the only way to get rid of Kenpachi's mental block, by forcing him to face annihilation on an inescapable scale. He would finally find the drive to truly become stronger, and when that seal broke, the monster inside roared. Kenpachi was so busted that he instantly killed Unohana with his true strength. The woman who had terrorized Soul Society for centuries, the original Kenpachi, died with a smile on her face, proud of the boy that she fought over 1,000 years ago. It's here Kenpachi finally heard the words he'd now longed to hear since he met Ichigo. I, who have been by your side longer than anyone, closer than any other, always watching over you. It is a pleasure to meet you, Kenpachi Zaraki. And so, Kenpachi finally meets his Zanpakutō, Nozarashi. The name translates to weather-beaten one, a representation of how the blade itself is worn out from countless battles, a battle-hardened warrior. Another meaning is exposed in a field, a motif for skulls, bones and skeletons. Things left out in the open to bleach in the sun. The remains of those who have fallen and been left behind. This ties directly into Yachiru's design. I'm talking about her skull hairpin. Again, when she first appeared to Kenny, it was amongst a pile of dead corpses. Even these little things show that Yachiru and Nozarashi were always meant to be one and the same. Now, just to clarify, Yachiru isn't the full embodiment of Kenny's Zanpakutō. Rather, she's the representation of the Bankai, much like Tensei Zangetsu is of Zangetsu. Which is actually kind of funny because Kenpachi's peak is represented by his childish desire, one that has no fear. But with all this new power, Kenny wanted to take it for a test drive. Luckily for him, Unohana and the Sternritters had the perfect opponent for him to fight. Leaving aside the Quincy King, the strongest amongst them, Gremmy Thormiox. I butchered his name, I'm sorry. This Quincy has arguably the most broken wrist aside from the Almighty. Gremmy's V, or the Visionary, is the ability to make anything he imagines become reality. During his fight with Yachiru, he imagines her bone was cookie. Literally, he does that shit. And then her skeletal structure, yep, you guessed it, is completely transmuted into baked goods. But little did he know, he messed up. As Zaraki Kenpachi arrives on scene to save his second in command. Now Gremmy, he's not even paying attention to the literal demon standing next to him. He thinks he got this in the bag. But what he doesn't realize is that anything he could imagine, any sort of conditions he put on Kenpachi, it doesn't matter. Kenpachi's body had been trained through decades of near-death combat. He just went through training where he essentially died hundreds of times. Gremmy throws guns, rockets, giant hands, any and all attacks that should be fatal. Kenpachi walks through unscathed, and in a list-to-ditch effort, Gremmy summons a freaking meteor. But for Kenpachi, that's exciting. After all, he had never caught a meteor before, and for the first time ever, he releases his Shikai. Nozarashi transforms into a massive battle axe. In his Shikai form, the blades had no unique abilities, no special techniques, no gimmicks, and really, it doesn't need it. After all, Kenpachi has always been about total raw power, and he actually pulls it off, slicing the meteor in half. Let's put that into perspective. According to a professor of mechanical engineering and material science at Johns Hopkins University, to destroy a meteor just 20 kilometers in diameter, you'd need about 200 gigatons of TNT. The nuke that destroyed Hiroshima was a 10th million of that. Even if you put Gremmy's meteor at just 1 kilometer in diameter, Kenpachi used 500,000 nukes worth of power to destroy it. And we're lowballing here. Without even a Bankai, Nozarashi is comparable to at least the strength of 500,000 nuclear arsenal. This feat led Gremmy to call Kenpachi a monster, who in turn states he can simply cut through anything, which would actually make sense as Kenpachi later even slices through the space-time fabric, as we see in chapter 578. In fact, he even has immunity to these type of attacks, as re-elaborated in the light novels. In Spirits Are Forever With You, chapter 18, Kenpachi was able to survive the after effect of Soya Azashiro, space-time manipulation Kido, which can tear holes in space-time. After being completely mugged, Gremmy resorts to his last way out, which was to push and imagine himself with Kenpachi's monstrous power. In fact, he imagines Kenpachi's power so perfectly that his body cannot take it. The monster he tries to become overwhelms him, ripping his body apart. I guess he didn't get the memo that there can only be one Kenpachi. But Yachiru, she watches the battle and then disappears. I mean, this was the moment she, or rather Nozarashi, was waiting for. Kenpachi finally called her real name, and with that, she doesn't need to exist separately to watch over him anymore. When Kenpachi finally says his sword's name, it sort of overwrote the given name that Yachiru received, and that's when she realized who she was, what her purpose is, and then returned to her true self. This is literally what happens as Kenpachi finds her robes and lieutenant badge on the ground, wondering what happened to the person who had always been by his side. But in war, there's no time to think, and in Kenpachi's case, greater foes to fight. Enter Gerard of Unohana's royal guard. Born from the heart of the Soul King itself, Gerard Valkyrie's power might even be more insane than Gremmy's. His shrift is M, the miracle. Every injury he sustains make him grow larger and more powerful. By the time Kenpachi arrived, Gerard had already grown to the size that could wipe out all of Soul Society if he just fell from the Soul King's palace. Gremmy may have had the ability to warp reality, but Gerard is more in line with Kenpachi. Raw power, scale, regeneration, a fight dialed up to 100%. After Kenpachi removed his eye patch and his raw Ryatsu was unleashed, Gerard still came out on top. He slammed Kenpachi into the ground hard enough to crater the entire area. And in that moment, lying in the rubble, Kenpachi saw Yachiru. Her image appeared before him one final time, and she told him exactly what she always did: to keep moving forward, to use her properly, to cut everything. Finally understanding who Yachiru truly is, Kenpachi stopped fighting for himself through her. Bankai! And the demon is unleashed. His skin turns red, black markings spread across his face, horns erupt from his forehead. He looks like an Oni, a creature from Japanese folklore, a devil monster of immense strength. Kenpachi's Bankai was never gonna be super complex, require some sort of mechanism or be energy based. He was always going at it head first, and in this frenzied state, nothing can stand in his way. This Bankai doesn't even have a name. He just screams. There's no wasting any time. Kenpachi's Bankai releases a massive wave of energy, powerful enough to level nearby building, and he can slice through enemies from distance that would normally require a ranged ability, something Kenpachi has never had. The only downside to this is Kenpachi loses himself to the power. He becomes a feral animal who attacks friend or foe. And recognizing this, both Byakuya and Toshiro immediately backed up, not wanting to get smoked. But honestly, Kenpachi doesn't need to be conscious to wreck shit like he always does. By the end of the fight against Gerard, Kenpachi lost an arm. Not from Gerard's attack, but Nozarashi herself. She released more power than his body could physically contain, meaning at this point, the Bankai is still too much for him to handle. He's only just mastered activating it. Controlling it is the other half of the story. But even in this incomplete state, he slices Gerard's giant titan body in half, meaning he sliced the Soul King's heart in half, showing you just how crazy this power is. Unfortunately, this is the one and only time we see this power in action. However, we do get a little taste of Nozarashi in Can't Fear Your Own World, when Kenpachi fights a hollow known as Ikimikidono, who had also been infused with powers of the Soul King. This hollow had become so powerful, instead it could nullify Ichibe's ability, something even Yhwach couldn't do until awakening Almighty. And yet, Kenpachi defeated this hollow using only his Shikai. And yeah, I know it sucks that we haven't seen Kenpachi at peak yet, but hey, this does make the prospect of Kenpachi mastering this power during the Hell Arc even more hype. If he ever fully draws out all of Nozarashi's power, if he trains his Bankai to the point where his body can actually handle it without losing any limbs, he won't just be one of the strongest captains, but will be the strongest entities in all of Bleach. But to learn about the Hell Arc and the future generation of Gotei 13, then make sure to watch this video next.